So, quiet please. Thank you very much. Yeah, we, the Scottish Family Party, we stand for respect in the school, where pupils are silent. So please sit down. Be a good example. So I do apologize for being on stage again, but this time it's less personal and less emotional and a little bit more fact-based or data-based, but hopefully not less interesting. As I mentioned earlier on, I'm a so-called men's rights activist, which means I focus on issues experienced by men and boys. And as I also earlier stated, I was in the military, and that's when I started realizing that, because most of my friends and comrades in the military lost their children in custody battles. And back then I was still gay. And to me, it was very obvious immediately that they were experiencing discrimination. And as a minority group, I had this language, discrimination. I was like, that is clearly discrimination. But white, straight men don't know what that is, because they've been told over and over and over again, that doesn't happen to them. You're the oppressors, you're the bad guys, you have all the power. Well, to us, it often doesn't feel that way, and it's not like that. So, I would like to talk about gender equality. When we hear this term, we are trained to immediately think about so-called women's issues. But to honestly talk about equality, we have to look at disadvantages experienced by both sides. If we only look at and care about one group, we don't really talk about equality. We promote privileges and, because of that, discrimination. Tonight, I want to bring balance to the gender equality conversation, and I will focus on areas where men are struggling. This should be seen as complementary to the usual focus on women and girls. My focus on men's issues does in no way mean that women should have less support or that I don't care about women's needs. In fact, I care very deeply and think that women have been let down by feminism for decades by trying to erase what makes women special. Instead of giving the traditional role of women, and especially mothers, the respect they always deserved, feminism pushed women into the roles of men, whether they wanted this position or not. Feminism tried to equalize what made us different, complementary and a strong union. Instead of collaboration, we have seen competition, and I think we are all exhausted by this gender war. It is now accepted dogma that women are still oppressed in society and that men have it much better. Just think about the imaginary gender wage gap and the terrible injustice of the now abolished tampon tax. But if you look beyond the mainstream narrative, if you look at the real data, it becomes clear that it is boys and men, not women, who are more likely to experience negative outcomes in life and discrimination. Again, I'm not saying that women can't experience that, I'm just saying more likely. Let's look at some of the issues that affect more men than women. Because my time is limited and because I want to focus more on solutions than merely naming the issues, I will try to keep it brief. But there are a lot. Boys are more likely than girls to experience physical abuse by the parents. Boys are severely affected by growing up without a father, leading to negative outcomes in many areas, as we have heard earlier today. Boys tend to develop language skills later than girls. Boys underperform in reading and writing. Boys struggle more often with ADHD and autism. Boys are underperforming on all levels of education, including university. Boys and men are more likely to suffer from video game, porn, alcohol, and drug addiction. Young men and men are far more likely to get in contact with the justice system and are being treated far harsher than women who commit the same offense. Men experience domestic abuse in comparable numbers to women but receive almost no support. It's around 1% of the funding that goes to men. Female on male perpetrated sexual violence, no matter how brutal and intrusive, is excluded from the definition of rape. And here I would like to give an example. So, if a man is drugged and penetrated with a dildo, that is not rape. And also, if the same thing happens to a woman, it's also not rape, because feminists made sure that the word penis has to be in there, so that we can say 100% of rapists are men. Now they can't say that anymore because I think 1% of rapists are women that rape women with their female penis. Transgenderism. It's not a joke. That's unfortunately, sadly true. Female on male perpetrate, oh wait, we had that. Fathers have no say in regards to abortion. Fathers do not have to be informed that they have a child. The family court is biased against fathers in cases of divorce. Well, actually in all areas. False allegations of domestic abuse by women against men are encouraged by the current system. Men make over 75% of suicides, with Scotland leading in the UK and with the Highlands, my area, leading in Scotland. The mental health sector is dominated by women and has a strong female focus, even though men suffer greatly under mental health problems. There is no strategy to address men's health, despite men experiencing more severe health issues than women overall. 80% of rough sleepers are men, but the government focuses on women that experience homelessness. 95% of workplace fatalities are men, and men die 4 years younger than women on average. These are all very serious issues. Some of them are very complex and difficult to address and to change, and other ones are very easy to change and are often a result of current discrimination, which just needs to be replaced with a balanced approach. I would like to look into 3 areas that could easily be improved: education, discrimination in service provision, and fatherlessness. Let's look at education and why boys are falling behind. Some of the reasons are: number 1, the educational system has become more and more female-driven and female-centric. Only 11% of primary teachers and only 36% of secondary teachers are men. But there is research that proves that boys are actually performing better when they have a male teacher. It might actually have to do with the voice, because boys don't hear as well as girls. Number 2, physical activity, focus on academic rigor, and competitiveness have been replaced with a focus on feelings. Academic expectations have been lowered, and individual accomplishments are being replaced by collaborative work, which doesn't work as well for boys. Number 3, schools fail to support boys, even hold them back, and there is an active demonization of masculinity. Boys often hear that the future is female, masculinity is toxic. A little example from our school up in the Highlands, and it's a tiny school, so it's everywhere. I used to run the youth club, and because of that I went to the school, talking to the teachers, and there was a bookshelf where kids could borrow books, and there were about between like 15 and 20 books for girls, and they were like girls in politics, girls in STEM, you can do it, you can be whatever you want to. There was one book for boys, something like Stephen's Great Adventure or something like, and I'm sure Stephen's Great Adventure was nice, but the focus was very clear. Girls need to be empowered. Boys don't even need to read. And maybe boys didn't want to read as much. Encourage them. So what can we do to change all these issues? Encourage more men to choose teaching as profession, both in primary and secondary school. This needs to be an ongoing campaign, and the work environment needs to be open for men. And that includes that schools need to be okay, at least okay, with masculine expression, instead of demonizing them. Now, when I say encourage more men to choose teaching as a profession, I'm not talking about quotas. We want the best people to get the job. But I think But I have talked to some teachers, male teachers, and while they said that they hugely enjoyed working with the kids, they did say that sometimes the work environment did not feel very positive to them. We also know that boys do better academically when they have physical outlet, if the class is well structured, and if there is supportive competitiveness. We need to bring this back. We also need a much stronger focus on reading, writing, and a more structured approach to learning. Our schools need to start encouraging boys to the same degree they encourage girls without coercing them to act more gender neutral. Boys need to know that it is okay to be a boy, just like girls need to know that it's okay to be a girl. The next issue I would like to address and provide a solution for is discriminatory service provision and treatment of men. This includes areas such as tackling homelessness, help for male victims of domestic abuse, mental health support, the bias in the family court, unequal sentencing of women and men in criminal justice, and many other areas. I'm not trying to solve all these problems now. All I'm trying to say is we need to remove a bias. Here are 3 examples of this bias. The NHS asks all women if they experience domestic abuse, but explicitly excludes men from this screening process, even though men are already less likely to ask for help. Their reasoning: it might make men feel uncomfortable, and we don't have data that proves that it would help. Well, of course you don't have data because you haven't tried it. The next example: homeless women are treated preferentially, even though the vast majority of the homeless are men, and homeless men are more likely to be victimized and to die on the streets. The best practice approach for domestic abuse victims that end up homeless completely excludes men. I tried to challenge that. I wrote emails to them. What I got back was radical feminist rhetoric. Women are vulnerable, men don't have it bad. And there was no arguing with them. I would have to look that up. So it was a best practice that was advocated by an organization, and I wrote to the organization, but it was co-signed by a representative from the from the SNP. Third example: the justice system treats women more leniently because it views female perpetrators as victims of trauma and victims of society. The fact that this is equally the case for male perpetrators is ignored. There is a strong push to decriminalize even female murderers and to get rid of female prisons altogether, while punishing men harder and harder in case of alleged violence against women, with less and less evidence needed. But why do we treat men and women so unequally in a supposedly egalitarian society? It stems from society's urge to protect women who we see as more vulnerable and more deserving of protection. And to be honest, I am a chivalrous person, so I feel this urge as well. But the numbers speak for themselves. Men are far more affected by aforementioned issues. I do not advocate for less support for women, but there is absolutely no justification to still prioritize women when men are more affected and equally or more vulnerable. What is the solution? Well, it's actually very simple. Stop the obsessive focus on women and start focusing on people. And you do that based on their needs. The NHS, the police, and most service providers prioritize women, and they are trained to do so. This gender bias is pushed for by lobby groups such as Women's Aid. And to be very clear, I have absolutely no problem with women working for Women's Aid. They do a wonderful job, but the higher-ups in Women's Aid are part of a mafia. Similar to organizations such as Mermaids and Stonewall, who do the same for the LGBT community, these radical political activists should not have the power to create unequal service provision. Their sexist approach needs to be replaced with an inclusive approach that looks at the needs of the individual. In other words, the solution, or at least part of the solution to address many men's issues, is simply to stop intentionally excluding them from services and to treat them like a human being? Crazy thought. But one of the most crucial areas in which men are actively discriminated against is the rights and responsibilities of fathers. And I want to highlight that this is about rights and responsibilities of parents, and those should be shared by mothers and fathers. We currently treat mothers as the only important parent in the life of the child and fathers as the financial providers with no other value beyond that. We are the Scottish Family Party, and our main focus is the protection of the family. The most vulnerable part of the family are children, and children need both father and mother. This is evident in all research. The destruction of the family unit is, in my opinion, akin to child abuse. And we experience the results of this child abuse in a shocking way in Scotland, where addiction, suicide, mental health issues, criminal conduct, abusive behavior, and becoming a victim of abusive behavior are all increased as a result of broken homes and children growing up without a father. How can we reverse the trend of collapsing marriages and fatherless children? Here are some ideas that would protect family stability, would protect children, and also fathers. And to be honest, also mothers. The most important aspect is making divorces more difficult, especially if children are involved. Couples counseling needs to be mandatory with the aim of reconciliation. If the relationship, marriage, cannot be saved, there should be shared custody in all cases, unless there is evidence of direct danger to the child. Both parents should spend an equal amount of time with the child, have shared responsibility and rights. Both parents have to provide equal financial security to the child, and the financial support should benefit the child, not the other parent. I would also propose that the person who files for divorce or who is at fault has to relocate. But both parents should have to remain in close proximity to each other to facilitate child contact. So to make that clear, I would, if it was up to me, I would ban parents from moving away. These suggestions might sound draconian, but today most divorces, and they are usually filed by women, are usually the reason for them is simply dissatisfaction. If you don't have children, this might be reason enough. But if there are children involved, their well-being supersedes a parent's feeling of dissatisfaction. I would, of course, not force adults to stay together, but if the parents separate, usually to satisfy their own needs, the benefit of the child must supersede the preference of the parents, such as moving away, rejecting their responsibilities, and using the children as weapons against the other parent. All this needs to be punished. Children are not weapons. I know that my suggestions might not sound like man's issues, but let me assure you that they are. It is crucial for men, especially fathers, to take responsibility and to be allowed to take responsibility. It is equally important for children, especially sons, to have an involved father who takes responsibility. And while feminists claim that they want fathers to be more involved, they have opposed shared custody and fathers' rights every step of the way, and still do. Our government, under feminist-in-chief Nicola Sturgeon, has made perfectly clear that they do not care about men. And we see the result in record numbers in suicide, addiction-related deaths, and young men dropping out of education. And while the collapse of our educational system is more than concerning, the growing number of boys checking out of education might be a blessing in disguise, because at least they avoid years of indoctrination and hostility. I see many young men in the Highlands dropping out of school as soon as they can and going straight into well-paid jobs in local industries. I see them starting committed relationships at a fairly young age, and many talk about wanting families. These young men are my hope, but we have to fight for a society that gives them a chance and a purpose. Last but not least, don't hurt yourself. Last but not least, earlier we heard that there should be a minister for families, and I fully support that. But unfortunately, I know that this minister for families will be a woman and will be a feminist. We have had a minister for women for a very long time. We actually have, in England, Wales, they have a minister for women and equalities, a minister for women, a victims commissioner who only focuses on women, a domestic abuse commissioner who only focuses on women. So there is a lot of representation. So I want a minister for men. And I don't like identity politics. We shouldn't need one. We shouldn't need a minister for women. And we shouldn't need a minister for men. And I know people from the men's movement that say, oh, there shouldn't be a minister for men. We should just have a minister for equalities, and this minister will cover all. Well, she will not. Because we know it's going to be either a woman or a gay man who is a feminist as well. And I have no problem with gay ministers, of course, and I don't even have a problem with feminists being in a position of power, if it's one or two, but it needs to be counterbalanced, and at the moment there is no counterbalance at all. So if you see a campaign towards a minister for men, that might be me, and please support my push towards that. Thank you so much for listening.